I thought I'd spend just a minute or two talking about what I call the triple nickels or the 3 5s that are not often talked about in instructional design textbooks, maybe even instructional design courses. But as you become an instructional designer, you will realize that these unwritten but critically important 15 divided into 3 groups of 5 aspects of the field are of critical importance. The first collection of 5 is how it happens. How do we get in the instructional design mode of operation? Next, what implications are there when we practice instructional design? And finally, I'm going to say a few words about why we do it this way, why it's important. First of all, the first 5 are the why, how it often happens, not why, but how instructional design activities or jobs or responsibilities often unfold. First of all, they almost always happen quickly. There's not a lot of advanced planning time. In the case study we're talking about here was a phone call. There was a job description disseminated, and there was a letter of agreement signed all within a week or two. And the expectation was that before the end of the fiscal year, those monies had to be spent. Second, almost all instructional design activities, especially those funded by third parties or external sources like the government, are underfunded. So they happen quickly. Second, they're underfunded. Often they're remote, especially if you're a consultant. It's probably not going to happen in your building or maybe even in your organization. It's probably going to happen somewhere else where they say, we need instructional design help. So you've got that remote responsibility that has to be dealt with. Next, it's often restricted. The kinds of things that instructional designers are trained to do, like needs assessments, often are not possible. We are not permitted, and the ability to do some of these things are restricted. And almost always the responsibilities are vague. There's more uncertainties than one is in classrooms at least led to believe. So quickly, underfunded, remotely, restricted, and vague. Well, what does this mean as an instructional designer? How does these 5 assumptions I've just mentioned, so the second nickel, the second 5, what does this tell us? First of all, we have to be risk takers. In other words, it's assumption driven. We have to make some assumptions about the target audience, about the outcomes, which often are not clearly defined, about what's expected of us. Third, it's messy. It's not clear cut. Sometimes we have to loop back. Sometimes we have to bypass some steps in the instructional systems design process. Often, what we do is incomplete. We don't touch all the bases. So what that often means is the instructional designer needs to be intuitive. They need to think through what really needs to happen and often read code that is never clearly articulated and defined. So you have to make some decisions that way. Risk-taking, assumption-driven, messy, incomplete, and often intuitive. So why do we do it? If the textbooks say one thing and our, quote, employer says another, why do we do these things? Well, probably what we do because we are trying to touch all those bases that the instructional design process talks about. It's probably going to be better than what's currently being practiced. That's almost always the case because we're going to spend some time on it. We're going to bring our expertise in. Next, there are often unanticipated outcomes. We'll talk about those in this course, but things that happen during the process that were not anticipated beforehand, both by you, the instructional designer, and the client or the organization that you're serving. It's a career building activity. Instructional designers become credible because they have experience. And how do you get experience? You have to do things. You have to risk take, and you have to do instructional design. It helps us, the process, solidify our assumptions. There is a certain experience-based process to doing instructional design in the real world. And probably most important, we signed a contract, and so we need to fill it. So what we're going to do is almost always going to be at least better, maybe a lot better, hopefully considerably better than what's currently being done. Next, we might identify some unanticipated outcomes. We might fix some things that weren't thought to be broken, or learn some things, or provide some things that weren't requested to begin with. That's career building. It makes you a better instructional designer. It helps us solidify our assumptions, so the risks that we take and the assumptions that we make are clarified, sometimes modified, sometimes reinforced. And it's a job, so we're expected to do it. Especially now when we're moving from this face-to-face environment to a online environment in our instructional design. So when we fulfill our contracts, we always give them 10% more, don't we? Isn't that the rule of thumb? Fill the contract and provide 10% more than what was asked for. Finally, instructional design is a well-documented and recognized professional field. There are a lot of pretenders to the title instructional designer. There's more to instructional design than the ADDIE model.